the latest installment of everyone's favorite elaborate death franchise is here. Final Destination Bloodlines is directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein and follows Stephanie, who, plagued by nightmares about her grandmother, returns home to find answers. In her quest to find out about the lives her grandmother saved years ago, she discovers that her entire family is on death's list. Like a lot of horror fans, I enjoy the Final Death franchise. They're a little corny, they're a little goofy, but I feel like this franchise is one of the more memorable household names in the genre, especially to people who maybe aren't necessarily horror fans or don't label themselves as horror fans. It's a very like cultural and like generational thing at this point. Like everybody knows not to drive behind a truck carrying a bunch of logs on it. And Bloodlines, surprisingly, like I wasn't expecting this going in, is a movie that is like seemingly aware of the way the franchise as a whole has become a part of the cultural zeitgeist, so to speak. So this felt like a Final Destination through a meta lens, which we know is my bread and fucking butter. We are fully aware of Final Destination as a franchise. We know what to expect. We know the rules. And this movie played around with that in the best way. There were many setups, like without payoffs based on what we think we know is going to happen. For example, like a character backing into a street bragging about how they're not scared of death or ranting in some way. And because of this franchise, we're expecting them to get hit by a bus suddenly, and maybe that doesn't happen in this movie. And I loved the way that the movie played with like the rules and our expectations. It ended up making a lot of the deaths more surprising because I actually didn't see them coming. I thought I did and I ended up being wrong. Like I feel like they were really playing with our comfort zone, knowing about the Final Destination movies, and I really enjoyed that. And mad respect to the way they kind of like almost like zoomed out to show how tangled and complex this web of death is. Because Iris, in the beginning of the movie, saved so many people that death had to then go rectify. Some of these people had families that were never meant to be a thing, and that's how we got this movie, and most likely every other Final Destination movie that we've seen thus far, which is so wild and tangled considering the franchise kind of was already connected because the 5th movie loops everything back to the 1st movie in a really cool way, and that's way before Bloodlines ever came out. So let's talk about the deaths, because let's be honest, that's what we're going to go see a Final Destination movie for. Actual plot and characters are kind of secondary. It's the crazy, elaborate, Rube Goldberg machine-like deaths that we have come to know and love. So I'm naming this segment of the video Daddy Death, and it's really just a mini ranking of the deaths in this particular Final Destination movie. It doesn't really need its own separate name. I kind of just wanted to do it. Starting with my least favorite, it was Julia's. It did have the surprise factor of Stephanie like predicting it earlier, just having the wrong person. But I almost feel like she could have ducked back down into the garbage truck and saved herself a little bit of time, because her brother had already like stopped the garbage truck at this point, and I feel like the driver could have stopped the like compacting thing going on. And I feel like she could have been saved, actually. It was a brutal kill to see happen. Like, it happens very slowly, seeing her head get crushed, and it was pretty gnarly. But overall, not my favorite. Next was Uncle Howard's death, and mostly because it was missing the surprise factor for me, because that is one that featured very prominently in the promos ahead of the release of this movie. But it felt the least organic, with the crazy way the lawnmower like reared up to get the guy's head. And yes, I know the deaths are meant to be crazy, but the best ones for me are the ones that like toe the line perfectly and feel realistic despite the craziness. My next favorite was Iris's death because of the surprise factor. I really loved the setup, and it was kind of like that setup and almost lack of payoff, or very delayed payoff that I was talking about earlier. It was a super long wait for the payoff, and it was playing with our expectations because we see the wind, we hear the chimes, we know that death is around and death is about to do something, and Iris just like puts a lid on it and stops it. And those are also some of my favorite like Final Destination kills, are the ones that like have false setups and you think you know what's about to happen, or at least what's about to set off the elaborate death, and then it doesn't happen, and then you get a little comfortable, and then it ends up coming back in a surprising way. Like, oh, that's how that factored in. So seeing Iris thwart the setup only to trigger the payoff by simply stepping outside was kind of awesome and very silly, but I loved it. My ultimate favorites were Eric's and Bobby's, and I'm just gonna include them together because they happen super close together. Eric's was particularly brutal and a little funny, with the like super magnetic power of the MRI machine. And there was the brutality of it. It actually, in a very weird way, kind of reminded me of like the pool drain kill from the Final Destination. And then with Bobby's, it's exactly what I was talking about a second ago with the super long setup. Like the whole vending machine bit and the spring kind of thrusting forward, and you think that that's what's gonna get him, and it doesn't actually end up happening. And so we get comfortable and we're like, okay, it's not gonna be that. And then when the whole thing with the magnet happens and the spring actually ends up being the cause of Bobby's death, it has that awesome surprise factor of like, oh, that's how it factors in, okay. And then I wanna talk about the premonition scene separate, because I feel like that's its own thing. And I would actually kind of love to do a ranking of just the premonition scenes from Final Destination, because I consider them their own separate thing. I gotta say, this one was kind of one of my least favorites, which is weird considering my intense fear of heights. It was cinematic as fuck. There was lots of crazy, brutal things happening. It was very exciting. It just felt a little too obvious to me. It's a death trap of a building from the jump, versus the other opening premonitions that take place in inherently dangerous environments, but I feel like we normally don't think too hard about them, like driving across a bridge, getting on a plane, getting on a roller coaster, versus this ridiculous building that has like really only two viable ways out of the top. Yeah, it's a death trap building. And maybe it's just me, but I never would have gotten in that elevator in the first place. All right, and that ends our daddy death segment. Overall, I thought Final Destination Bloodlines was a lot of fun, and that's what I want with a Final Destination movie, so I was definitely satisfied. And it ended up being like a heartwarming ending for horror icon Tony Todd. We got to learn the origins of his character finally, which is really exciting. That character has been a staple in this franchise since the first one. And then the monologue he delivers in this movie about death and enjoying the time he has left hit different, knowing that, you know, he was probably in that kind of headspace anyway when he filmed this, and then obviously now that he's gone. I definitely cried in the theater during that part. And the fun thing about this franchise is that it's always open for more movies. Obviously the list of people who survive the premonition at the beginning of this movie is extensive, and I feel like there would be more stories to tell just within that web. Plus, death is all around, so there's like unlimited stories essentially that could be told beyond this little bubble of death's design that this franchise takes place in. I asked you guys on my Instagram, just for curiosity purposes, like what y'all's favorite Final Destination movie was. It was actually quite varied, which I think is a fun thing amongst horror fans. Like, I feel like in other franchises, there's very clear like front runners for most people's favorite like Halloween movie or Nightmare on Elm Street movie or Scream movie. But there's actually quite a lot of variety amongst amongst you guys when I asked what your favorite Final Destination film was. And I don't know if I've ever done a ranking of the franchise at all either. I'll take a look. And if I haven't, maybe that can be something I can do now that we have a new movie. But I would love to hear how Bloodlines fits into your ranking. I gotta say, I don't think this one is my least favorite. So let me know how this fits into your ranking in the comments. Let me know what you thought about the movie just in general. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, maybe give it a thumbs up, maybe subscribe, I don't know. I'll see you next week with a new video. Until then, stay strange. Bye.